We made so much of Natasha's armor so that she could also practice in it. And we did that with all of the characters so that they had a practice costume to practice their stomp work.
Oh, a practice costume. Never heard that one before.
Yeah, which was always crazy because they needed to start practicing, months in advance.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Art of Costume podcast. I am your host, Spencer Williams, and thank you so much for joining us for another bonus episode. Hey, costume nerds, thank you so much for being here. Today's episode is a special one as we are talking about the hit Star Wars series on Disney Plus, Ahsoka, which is perhaps one of my favorite Star Wars series, which is actually a high bar because I'm a big Star Wars fan. But before we get into it, let's start with a summary. After the fall of the Galactic Empire, former Jedi Knight Ahsoka Tano investigates an emerging threat to a vulnerable galaxy. Ahsoka joins with her own former apprentice, Sabine Wren, and other characters from the animated series Star Wars Rebels to prevent Grand Admiral Thrawn, who's been stranded in another galaxy, from returning and uniting the remnants of the Empire against the New Republic. And that is Ahsoka. Let's dive behind the costumes. This series was created by Dave Filoni with costumes designed by our friend, whom I miss every day, Shawna Trpcic. Shawna's notable work included Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Firefly, Angel, The Cabin in the Woods, The Book of Boba Fett, and of course, The Mandalorian Seasons 2 and 3. Throughout her career, Shawna was nominated for 5 CDG awards, winning 2, and was nominated for 4 Emmys, including one just this year for her work on Ahsoka, alongside assistant costume designer Elissa Alcala and costume supervisor Devin Patterson. And as most of you know, Shawna passed away in October of last year, which has really been a devastating loss for so many people, her family, friends, and her crew, which she also considered family. It's been hard. So obviously we love Shawna here at the Art of Costume podcast. She was very supportive of what Elizabeth, Daniel, and I were doing on this podcast, as it was a way for her to connect directly with the fans like yourself to talk about Star Wars and costumes, which she truly loved. And I miss her dearly, and I'm just so grateful really to all of you listening for helping make the Art of Costume podcast what it is, because without all of you and your support, I don't know that I would have been able to meet Shawna. We had some great conversations both on and off camera, talking not just about costumes, but just about creativity, family, nature even. Shawna was just a one-of-a-kind human. We miss her terribly. I miss her terribly. But I take comfort knowing that her legacy lives on through her work and her incredible crew. Which leads me to today's episode. I am beyond excited to say that I had a chance to talk with Alcala, assistant costume designer on Ahsoka and The Mandalorian, who worked alongside Shawna very closely. I've been lucky to get to know over this past year, whom is someone I deeply admire. With the Emmys coming up, I knew I had to get into the costumes of Ahsoka, and was very gracious to take the time to come on a podcast, talk about the costumes of Ahsoka, including Sabine, Hera, the Witches of Dathomir, which is my absolute favorite Star Wars lore, Thrawn, and of course, talking about working with Shawna. I do need to make one note. We were having some connectivity issues when we chatted that day. Technology was just not on our side, but it was such an incredible conversation, and I'm so excited to share it with you all. Join us after the break for my conversation with Elissa Alcala.
Hi, this is Dan, audio engineer of the podcast, here to let you know that if you wanted to support the show, you can head over to theartofcostume.com/podstore. There you can buy some awesome TeePublic merch with the podcast logo, such as a shirt, coffee mug, stickers, and of course, a baby onesie. Thanks for all your support.
I'm very excited to talk to you about Ahsoka and learn more about your experience. You know, obviously, Shawna was a friend of the podcast. She was on twice. We actually did 3 interviews, but she was on the podcast twice. And one of the things I loved about her was that she was a true nerd, and I could just feel it vibrating off of her every time we would talk. Like she was more of a nerd than I think anyone on this team was. And knowing you, I kind of get the same vibe. You definitely feel like you understand Star Wars and you just love science fiction, whatnot. So tell me a little bit more about your passion for Star Wars, or maybe just storytelling in general.
So yeah, I actually grew up in this industry. My dad is a director, so I grew up on sets, and I knew from pretty much a very young age that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be behind the scenes, helping tell stories. So I knew from a pretty young age that I wanted to go into costume design. So from there, I kind of did anything that I could do to surround myself in that world. For college, I actually went and studied fashion design in New York at Parsons.
Right.
Messed around with the idea of maybe going into fashion, but then decided that where my passion lied was in costumes. So after graduating in 2012, I moved out to LA and have never looked back and joined the industry. And I've, I guess, been in the industry for, a little over 10 years. So I worked as a costumer, obviously started out as a PA, but I've done a little bit of everything. I first got into 705 as a shopper. And then from there, I've worked set, I've worked trailer, I've worked principal cast, I've worked background, done a little bit of everything. And then, in the past 4 years, I jumped up to ACD. And then more recently, with the help of Shawna, actually was co-designer and then designer. So, yeah.
That's awesome. What a great trajectory. And clearly you're a little bit of a nerd too. I mean, you and I are both surrounded by Star Wars stuff. I mean, mine is just like right above me. It's not that much compared to what you have. So you're a big nerd, I assume.
Oh, huge nerd. Growing up, I mean, I always loved anime. I've always loved comic books. Some of my favorite movies growing up that I think when I saw the movies, I was like, oh my God, I could make something like that. It was like, The Fifth Element and then Legend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely have always geared towards sci-fi fantasy. That has been my lifelong dream. Back in the day, we had a Laserdisc, and it's basically a Laserdisc was like the pre-early DVDs. They're as big as like a vinyl record,
Right.
And on Laserdisc we actually owned the original trilogy because my dad purchased it. We actually didn't own too many Laserdisc, and we didn't own a lot that I was allowed to actually watch because they were for older audiences, rated R and whatnot. So
Yeah.
Star Wars was one of the only ones. It was Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Later in life, I kind of winded up into the cosplay community, but more so for anime when I was younger. So I would build costumes based off of some of my favorite anime characters. And then in college, I actually met a group of friends who also work in the industry and love Star Wars just as much as I do. And we would make Star Wars costumes together. So I actually cosplayed Star Wars before I worked for Lucasfilms. So I had a Padme Amidala costume, and I also cosplayed as Kylo Ren. I'm a diehard Star Wars fan. So getting to work on the show, I remember getting that phone call. I was on another job, and it was during COVID, actually. So everything had just come back. And it was the supervisor at the time being like, being like, hi, I can't tell you what the show is, but like, it's like, are you comfortable being in the dirt and being outside and like comfortable with sci-fi? And I was just like, oh my God. Cause I knew Mandalorian was filming out of Manhattan Beach Studios, but I never dreamed that I would get on it. And I wanted to so bad. And I kept like reaching out to people that I knew who were working on it. And I was like, please, 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 please. Like, I will do anything. Just let me work on this show. It's a lifelong dream. And I got the call and I remember just being like, please hold, and like pausing the phone and going and screaming outside because I knew he was calling me to work on a Lucasfilms project. And sure enough, it winded up actually being the Book of Boba Fett. So yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Could you imagine if it was just like some actually just random film that took place in the dirt? I'm so glad it worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, very relatable. And also Fifth Element was also like my vice that started me in costume design also too. So I definitely relate. So like you mentioned, you worked with Shawna on the Book of Boba Fett, The Mandalorian Season 3, and then Ahsoka. And if I remember correctly, prep on Ahsoka started, I believe, during Mando 3. And so what was that like? Were you all excited? It sounds like a nightmare, actually. But of course, she always painted it as it worked out. But
it did. Shauna was always definitely, it was so funny. The one thing that I admired most about Shauna was always just her ability to like be like, you know, never, she would get overwhelmed, but in the sense of she'd be like, okay, like this is what we're doing and we're going to do it and we're going to go for it and like jump in. Whereas like, I was always the one who was more like, can we do it? Can we say no? Like, is no an option?
She's like, we don't have a choice.
Yeah. And so, but with her, she would always, the thing that I think that I admired the most about her, and like I admired so many things, but it was her ability to just take things on and be like, we can do this. I know we can. And it was like with doing both Mando and Ahsoka at the same time and having to juggle both of them, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I don't know how we're going to do this. And she would just be like, well, we're going to do it. And I was like, okay, we're going to do it. You're right. We're just going to do it. And so that's what we did. But she would always just be like, you know, in her not being Master Yoda, but basically being Master Yoda, being like, why, like, we don't say no. There is no. We just do it. And it was like, okay, I got it, you know?
Cool.
So we had 2 supervisors at one time because we had one that was finishing up Mando, and then we had another one that started up on Ahsoka. And so that really helped because they were able to manage sort of like the costumers that were coming in and out, and also starting our workroom. So we would have people who would literally like on Tuesday working on Mando come to work on Wednesday, but be on Ahsoka. So it was like we would time it out to being like, okay, we can let this specialty person start on Ahsoka and we'll leave some of it. So it was all just about, we had, again, 2 amazing supervisors that were just able to juggle both people at the correct time of when we needed it. And obviously a lot of that was also communication between Shauna and them. And then we had actually a key costumer that we started who helped also organize the workroom, who was just strictly on Ahsoka. She day played with us on Mando on set, but she wasn't a full-timer on Mando. So she was able to jump up to being a full-time. So it was all just about finding the people and finding capable people, because when you work on a show that's custom made is you got to find people who are good at being willing to rise to the occasion, because even though there's a job description and you kind of know what your job is going to be, it is never just that. And it's always being able to adapt, and on the turn of like, you know, just being able to adapt so quickly. And so it was always about finding those people that could adapt and could change and just were really good at their jobs. So we really lucked out with finding an amazing crew. And Shauna was always really good about meeting people and being like, I know this person can handle this. And then like just taking chances and being like, you're going to do this job because I know you can do this job, and believing in us. And that alone giving us the ability to then do the job is just having someone believe in you.
Yeah, she really had a lot of trust in the people around her, because you're all essentially creating these fantasy worlds. So yeah, you could have a job description, but I mean, how can you explain what you're going to do in a job description? It's just not possible. So let's get to the series now. First of all, it was brilliant and some of my favorite Star Wars ever. I've been a big Ahsoka fan forever. I watched Clone Wars, Rebels, all that, and I was, obviously very stoked. We obviously have to start with Rosario Dawson, who plays Ahsoka, who has, this character's gone through quite a bit. There's an elegance to her, but she sees a lot of action in this series. And we also have this trajectory where have a character that's gone from this animated background, all the way back to the Clone Wars to what we have now. So between yourself, Shawna, Rosario, how did you all come up with the costumes for this character in this new series?
So, with Ahsoka's gray costume, that was established back in season 2 of Mando. And it was really important that she was still in the same costume. She obviously got to get her, I guess what everyone likes to fondly call her Ahsoka the White costume this season. And yeah. She also had a few other little costume changes here and there. Like she had her PJ look and like she had a few other things. And Rosario was so, such a big part of making decisions on all of those pieces. And in fact, because season 2, and then when she was wearing this costume, she did want to update her gray look. So her gray look did get a few updates of just making it more user friendly for her to be able to do the stunts that she knew she was needing to do. We recut some of the back line, which you get to see sometimes, but it's not a focal feature, just so she had more movement all around. So Rosario definitely she always was so much fun to have in the fittings because she was very involved in every aspect of her costume, and her and Shawna would talk through every piece of it. And she, Rosario wanted to touch the fabrics and she wanted to see kind of where Shawna's thought was going, but at the same time, Rosario respected Shawna and Shawna's vision and Dave's vision. So she would give her opinions of being like, oh, maybe could we have, could the backline do this, or can we have it more cut like this so I can move better? With her armor also, it was making adjustments to where it hit on her, so she could always make sure that it wasn't hurting her wrists and stuff. So Rosario was very in tune with what she needed the costume to do for her in order for her to fully take on being Ahsoka. And so she definitely, at the beginning of the season, we went over everything. And then also with her various changes that we had with her through the season, because she had, a few, because she had her space suit and these Ahsoka the White and her little PJ look, and she definitely sat with us and talked with us, and Shawna or Dave would do a quick sketch, and Rosario would just always be involved. And definitely it was always fun for me to get to watch the actors and Shawna kind of communicating. And then Shawna, she always had this way of understanding people without actually communicating. So she'd be like, no, I know what you want. I know exactly what it is you need. And then she would just do it. And then there'd be times where the actor would be like, yeah, no, you're right. That is exactly what I need.
Yes, so many good costumes. I love the spacesuit. That's a particular favorite of mine. But I mean, like you said, Ahsoka the White, Lord of the Rings nerd. So, I mean, I definitely really loved and appreciate that one for sure. But speaking of Rebels, we also got to see 2 other characters that came back into the live action world. For example, we have Sabine Wren, who I absolutely love, and then General Hera Syndulla, certified badass, our favorite space bomb. So what was it like working with these 2 characters, especially when some of them, like Sabine, is an actual artist? So that's a lot of fun, I must imagine.
Yeah, no, it was That was the thing with Ahsoka that I think everyone knew going into it, that we were bringing to life animated fan favorite characters, and just sort of this like wanting to make sure while through the whole process that we would be doing not only the fans proud, but Dave proud, but also, having the actors be involved, and, just wanting it to just be this kind of, beautiful thing of, again, bringing animated characters just to life. And it's also taking what is animated and figuring out what is practical, and then translating that into the real world. And Dave was definitely involved in all of this process. And Shawna was constantly like texting him or emailing him questions about, different things of like, should we, like, what artwork with Sabine do you want us to incorporate? And the artwork that Sabine draws on her own armor changes. So we always were including Dave and asking, Dave and Doug and everyone, these characters, bringing them to life we had a lot of people involved. And also changing them a little bit from obviously their animated costumes, because obviously you have to make it practical for human beings to be able to wear it. So Natasha, definitely, when we brought her in, we had her try on a tan suit that we had. We wanted to make Sabine's costume, just movement, mainly. It was for movement. And so her costume ended up being split up into two. So it's pants and a top. It's more than that, but it's a very involved costume.
Right.
Stunts was very involved with us, and it was really awesome because Stunts actually where they practice, and they would always next door to where our costume department was. So we would always be able to be like, hey, can you send so-and-so over? We want to try this armor on to make sure that they can do the movements that they're needing to do. Or we would run over there with like a mold for them to try it on to see if they could do the movements while they were rehearsing. So we were very involved with Stunts, and it was great because Stunts obviously wanted to be involved. And I think, and Shawna also wanted to make sure that everything was practical, that they could do everything and not be hindered because of the costume. That was very important to Shawna, was that they needed everything in their costumes. So, and that obviously involved, including the actors, and having them wear practices when they were rehearsing. So we made so much of Natasha's armor so that she could also practice in it. And we did that with all of the characters so that they had a practice costume to practice their stunt work in when they were
practice costume. Never heard that one before.
Yeah, which was always crazy because they needed to start practicing, months in advance. So it was always like, okay, cool, we could get you this, because we were always on a deadline, and it always felt like we were never ahead, and we were always just on schedule. Even if we tried to get ahead, it was always just chasing that deadline. But yeah. And then with Hera, it was so much fun to bring that costume to life. And we definitely, working with Mary Elizabeth, she definitely had, a lot of input in how she wanted us to fit. And it's stuff like that you take into consideration. And or like how the top should fit. And then like you can see like the jacket, like, are we going to do a crop jacket? Are we going to do a longer jacket? So it's just doing fittings and including the actors and letting them see the fit. And also it was like we would try on the costume with the actors, and then finally you always saw that moment where sometimes we would try on pieces and you could tell they couldn't see the character yet, but eventually we would get to a stage where it would be out of actual fabrics, or we would have actually armor pieces, or we would have little things here and there that we would put on them, and you would see it in their eyes of being like, oh, I'm the character now. And that was a lot of fun. And I remember, I do remember that happening with Mary Elizabeth in one of the fittings that we did with her. And she just like looking in the mirror and being like, well, yep, I'm the character now. So it's a lot of fun.
That's so cool. I can't even imagine. I would love to just be there for that moment. But we have to talk about part 5, Shadow Warrior. This episode was absolutely brilliant, as it took us back to the Clone Wars to see young Ahsoka and the one and only Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker. I mean, I could feel the universe just like collectively gasp watching this episode when it came out. And we also got to see the clones again, which was so much fun. I have to imagine this must have been a massive episode for you, Shawna, the team. I just watching it back the other day, I was like, ugh, I can't imagine.
Yeah, this episode is the episode that almost broke all of us.
Yeah,
in a good way. It's just we knew, from the beginning, reading the scripts and watching sort of the previs that this episode was going to be something really special. And we knew that we had to get these costumes right, because these are the costumes you see in this episode are pretty much literal translations from the animation of how we messed around with some of the colors in Hayden's outfit. But for the most part, it is true to what you saw in the animation, and also figuring out how these armor pieces actually work, especially with like Hayden's, like his shoulder pieces and like how he was supposed to do the movements. So that involved we had to make him a piece that he could practice in so he could make sure he could do everything. And I just remember that piece took a while to get right. And it just was like holding breath of being like, please, 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 please work. And if something needed minor adjustments, then, we would get the notes and then we would fix it. But working with Hayden and Ariana was absolutely amazing. Ariana, it was just, special place in my heart for her. She was so much fun to work with, and watching her become Ahsoka and then her getting to spend time also a little bit with Rosario so she could figure out Rosario's movements for the character, and also encapsulating young Ahsoka from the animation. She was just so brilliant and got it so quickly. And like, I just remember even in our first fitting being like, oh my gosh, she is young Ahsoka and so excited for her to get to try these costumes on. And it was really, really cool. And then her playing the two ages too. So we had like subtle differences in the costumes to try to help tell that story as well, because it's obviously the same actor and she's two different ages. So we had like slightly taller shoes in one of them. And we gave her a more feminine cut in her older version, whereas it's, slightly younger cut in the first version of her costume. And then this is the first time ever in Star Wars history that we have actually live action clone troopers. We made those. Those are not animated. I became a clone expert on this show because it was necessary, because in the Clone Wars, the animated series, you have different clones. And so it was having to figure out, is it phase 1? Is it phase 2? Like, which clone are we having? And I had to become an expert, and because we have both phase 1 and phase 2 stormtroopers. So it was pretty cool. So, and it was crazy bringing them to life, and it was a lot of fun, but it was a big episode, and having to have all of this done, and it was insane. But I think it turned out to be an absolutely amazing episode that I think everyone is very, very, very proud of. So
they absolutely should be. I mean, I could rewatch this episode over and over and over. I just remember watching it at home whenever it came out and being like, oh my gosh, is that like an Ahsoka clone trooper? Oh my gosh, is that Rex? Like, oh my gosh, is like just that entire 45 minutes. I had to lay down after. I was exhausted. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, this episode, I think, again, like I said, it almost broke all of us. Like, I cried a few times on this episode because it was a lot, and not just out of like it was a combination of just emotions of getting to bring this to life and getting to work, getting to be there and see all of this. It was very emotional, but also it was a big episode. And like, there were times where we were like, oh my God, are we actually going to make this deadline? And not being quite sure.
Yeah.
And working till the last possible minute and then bringing it to set and it was a really big episode. I actually, the day we filmed this scene, I remember crying over in the corner because we did it. And I was just so emotional. Just like, we did it. And like going and having to cry in the corner because I was just like, so happy and so relieved, and also just like in awe of how, like, I knew it looked good, but like seeing it all come together, it was just very emotional. So
yeah, wow, I can't even imagine those feelings. I gotta say, my favorite Star Wars lore has been and always will be the Nightsisters and Dathomir. I think they're so cool, so badass. And I'm trying to remember when it was, but I interviewed Shawna. I want to say it was around Book of Boba Fett time. And we were talking about bringing to life, Ahsoka and, all these characters from the animated series. It must have been Mandalorian because we talked about Bo-Katan also. And I remember I never try to get spoilers out of anyone, but for some reason this day I was feeling a little spicy. And I said something like if only we could just see like the Nightsisters or something one day. And Shawna like kind of looked at me and like kind of looked away and like started to hide a smile a little bit. And I knew, I was like, oh, they're doing the Nightsisters. Like she totally blew it. So I don't even know if we kept on the podcast, but it was so funny to me. So then cut to Ahsoka and I see the Nightsisters. So cool. So worth it. I totally love the textures, the textiles. This was exciting. I mean, bring to life these characters. Do you remember what the process was like in finding these fabrics?
it was definitely a process. So these were big characters to bring to life, obviously, because, I think there are a lot of people really love the Nightsisters and the lore that surrounds them. But we got sketches from Doug, and then always from there and we got inspiration from Dave because Dave always has his like jumping off point that he would always tell Shawna and our team. And so from the inspirations and from the sketches that we would get from Doug, Shawna then always would kind of like rethink how like, okay, this is our starting point. So how then do we go from there? And she knew that she wanted to have lots and lots of layers and lots of textures and that it would be different fabrics. And one of the big things that was huge throughout the season was also this, she wanted the fabrics to flow, and so did Dave. The fabrics had to be able to move in the wind. So we couldn't pick heavy fabrics. The witches are a lot of different silks. And we also got a whole bunch of the silks pleated. And then it was also a lot of sort of figuring out these like patterns, like herringbone patterns of, because we would take strips and then our tailors would be on the mannequins figuring out these shapes. And then they all had different hats. And it was really funny because I think some of our tailors, like we put them out of their comfort zone a little bit with these characters because like, you have your custom made people and you do have hat makers. But at the time we were asking our tailors to help us figure out how these were going to incorporate into the costumes. So they had to think about the big picture. So they'd be mocking up these hats. And then we would have we had a hat person who then did actually fabricate these as well. But they had to work together with our cutter fitters in order to make sure everything flowed and all of it made sense and that it all worked together. And it was really, really cool. But we also had our fabric shopper, Kevin. I just will never forget. He had to keep going out to try to find the fabric because Shawna was very well versed in fabrics and she knew what she wanted. And it's like that with some people where it was like you could never, you knew what you wanted and it was just having to try to find it. And she would always tell Kevin what she wanted. But the problem is finding that in the real world is just like,
Right.
Sometimes you couldn't. And so it would be finding the fabric that she wanted in like white or beige and then having to dye it. So a lot of this fabric actually got dyed. It wasn't even red to start with. We actually dyed it to the colors that Shawna wanted with, our ager dyer, Carol, did an absolutely amazing job of, Shawna would tell her what colors she'd want, and then she would dye it, and then they would have meetings, and then either it was right or she would have to, dye it again. And it was so much communication, and Shawna working hand in hand with all of our, specialty people, our tailors and our ager dyers. But yeah, and these, it's insane how many layers that these are. And it's just strips of fabric and then put back together. And then they all flow so nicely. And I just remember in our fittings, we would have the fan. They would have to move things so that it could flow and it could move. And so we had the fan in the fitting, and I would sit there on the ground, or Shawna would take it, and Shawna would be like moving the fan around to make sure that the dress flowed. We did that with quite a few of the costumes this season, but we always had a fan in the fitting room because we wanted to make sure that we could give Dave his flowy moment.
Yeah,
and
we're serious about that flow.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, it was totally worth it. And shout out to Kevin too. I know how hard that fabric shopping job is. We've talked about it before, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't imagine. So yeah, it came out. Speaking of some rather sinister costumes, I've been waiting to talk to you about some of these costumes we saw on Grand Admiral Thrawn's ship. Talking about being a stormtrooper expert. Now we have some really terrifying undead stormtroopers. I don't know how to describe them, but they're terrifying. I love the gold in them. And then, of course, we have Grand Admiral Thrawn back, which he's absolutely terrifying. Take us back. I know you must have had a hand in the gold in the stormtroopers.
Oh, everyone on our crew winded up having to help put these guys together. Kid you not. These guys, we literally, I will not forget. They worked. They worked. They had a call time. I think their call time was slightly later in the day, but I will never forget that a group of us stayed late into the night just finishing these guys up, because we had a lot. We made all of these. I think we made, God, did we have 40 of them?
Wow.
We made, and each piece has the kintsugi, which is the gold, and they all actually have, they got dremeled out, and then we put actual gold leafing into them, and then each of them had to get the red put on them. And we all, including Shawna, we were all there just finishing and or packing these up, because I don't know if you've ever had to pack a stormtrooper, but it takes talent, and it's like putting together a puzzle, because they all got packed in boxes that then got taken to set, and where our warehouse isn't where set is. So transpo would have to come and pick them up and then go and drop them off, and our set kids would have to get them set up. And it's just a huge process, and just packing them alone took us hours. And then you have to unpack them to get them dressed. So that process alone was just
thank you.
But we did it, and Frederick and Gio, shout out to Frederick and Gio, but they figured out all of it, and all of these have numbers in them, so we knew where all the pieces went back to, and so it's like putting back together a puzzle piece. And everything was labeled beautifully and got delivered to set, and but that was a process. And Dave was actually, we got the sketches from Doug and Dave wanted to make sure that these guys were actually, it wasn't visual effects, it was actually done onto the troopers. And so again, we took all of these stormtrooper pieces, and our specialty team for months were just dremeling into them, and then painting them, and then adding the gold leafing, and then also aging them, because they had to be dirty. And then we had to do all of the fittings. Every single one of these got a fitting, and it was It was insane. And it just shows you that we had an amazing crew because we were able to do this and we got everything into bins and we got it there. We got everyone dressed and it was, yeah, it was a lot.
It's a lot. It's brilliant. But I just, yeah, it takes an army to build an army.
It took an army to build these guys. And then it also took an army to dress these guys. We had so many set costumers and like shout out to like my main set crew always jumping in and helping dress these guys, but we would have to hire day players who shout out to our day players as well for just jumping in and being willing to learn something new day of. So yeah.
What a scary task.
Yes, I know. And that was the thing too, is you wouldn't always, because with how secret everything had to be, hush hush, it was like you wouldn't know what you were getting into. They wouldn't tell you what you were going to work on. Mm-hmm. So it was like we had a group of day players we kept in communication, but for a day like this, we have more people. So we had to bring in other people that, you know, I think came in and they were just like, whoa. But, you know, they all would jump in. Oh, and yeah, so
yeah,
it was a lot. And then with Thrawn, his costume, we actually had pieces of his costume made pretty early on because we had to do so much testing with him, with getting the color on the skin right. And then also with makeup, we worked hand in hand with Christina and her team because we were trying to figure out what fabric, the blue, like she would try out different paints and we would put it on someone and then we would put our fabric on. And so we would have a collar and trying to figure out how the blue paint wouldn't, because he's wearing white and he's blue. So It's like you would always get blue paint, but we had to figure out the best, you know, combo of fabric and, you know, paint and what would work the best together. And then also for us of having, because we would have to like wash the collars and stuff of being like, what's the easiest to get out and what fabric can we use? But we did wind up using, you know, the traditional Star Wars suiting fabric that all of Star Wars has pretty much used, the same company. And we got it from them and it was in like... It was white, and then we had to also figure out like taking it from like stark white and then figuring out what level. So like over dyeing it and teching it and doing all of that stuff. So it all worked together. So it was a very big process of working hand in hand with not only like the DP, but also Christina, getting him together. We also had to figure out a way to make it to where we were trying to figure out a way to do detachable colors so that we could switch out the colors really easily if we needed to.
It's so fun to look at. And I just got to shout out the aging and dying breakdown crew because I love how just subtly his uniform is just clearly falling apart. He's been wearing it for a while. And then, I mean, the breakdown of the Stormtrooper uniforms. I mean, honestly, they're incredible.
No, that was something that was really big for Shawna is working hand in hand with our ager dyer and with our specialty team is making this practical as well of like telling the story through aging and dying. It's like sometimes you look at someone wearing a costume and it looks brand new, but it's supposed to look brand new. But with Shawna, none of the costumes in this world in Star Wars, especially she never believed that they should look brand new, like they just came off a rack. She wanted them to look, give it that lived in look of like not having it be perfect. And it's like, obviously with a character like Thrawn, who is a meticulous, you know, creature of like wanting things to be perfect. He didn't, you know, after being on this planet for so many years, it's like he didn't necessarily have the resources to make sure his costume stayed in this sort of immaculate condition, but he would have done impossible to keep it perfect to the best of his ability, which is why we have that storytelling with the aging of having, you know, him having to have, you know, possibly him or, you know, one of his subordinates fixing little pieces here and there. But for the most part, it being still this sort of perfect costume, but with these like little just telltale signs of it being worn for years and not being able cleaned and or clean to his like their best ability, but not having access to like being able to switch suits every day. So yeah.
Oh, you almost feel bad for Admiral Thrawn for like a hot second, just like a little bit. So the final character I want to talk about, Baylan Skoll, who became a fan favorite character played by the late great Ray Stevenson. I love this costume because it had a bit of darkness to it. It's very structured, but also felt reminiscent to, you know, the Jedi Order that we know and love. And just honestly, if I were to pick a uniform, I'd be wearing what Baylan was wearing because it's so badass. But what was it like working with Ray Stevenson and developing this costume?
Oh, Ray was such a joy. He was so funny and was always just such a presence everywhere he was, in the sense of like, you know, the dude is a big dude. He's like 6'5", and he's also just this like such a kind-hearted soul, and like always had nice things to say and wanted to check in how you were doing, and was always playing, you know, it was like he would always be playing like dance music, and he just was always just living his life to the fullest, and like just being so much fun to be around. And Shawna and him, it was like in that fitting, it was like they would be giggling and like just having so much fun. And it was like with him too, it was like when we gave him his Jedi robes, he like immediately put them on and was like twirling around with it and being like fun, and like Sean showing him with the fan that it could still move, and like they just had so much fun in those fittings. He was involved a lot in his costume, and like he wanted to make sure that it like told a story about who his character was. And like and that was something I think that Shawna also loved doing, was telling stories in the costume that in a show you might not actually be able to see, but the actors knew it was there, and they would help come up with like the reasoning of why it was there. So it would be special to the actor, and the actor, it would give them something to play off of knowing that there's like in his specifically, he has in his vest and on the front of it, and within the braids, there's this stone that Ray really wanted to incorporate into his costume. It's a space stone. And so it's moldavite. And so we actually ordered some moldavite.
Wow.
And like he had a ring, and we couldn't, you know, and then like taking the moldavite and having our specialty team, because obviously they also have to do stunts in this. So we can't have real stones necessarily like on the costume just in case they fall on it. So it was taking the moldavite and then making, you know, stones out of, you know, either resin or out of plastic. So if they did fall on it, it wouldn't hurt. And then we did have pieces that had the actual stones in it. So when he wouldn't be fighting, if he was just standing there, he could wear his actual ring that had a real moldavite stone on it and stuff like that. So we had these stones throughout his costume, and he was very like excited about incorporating that. And then he was also the one that like originally his costume was only supposed to be like this sort of black, and then he worked also Ray and Shawna, they worked with Dave of like having this sort of, you can tell it in the picture you have, he has this sort of like green overtone, and it's like this idea of just like that's the color his costume kind of aged, was this, it has green, and you can see it in little pieces throughout the show of definitely being green. But I think a lot of people sometimes at first glance just think it's black, but it's not. It has this green overlay on it, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, and their costumes were from the beginning like this is one of the ones where we did get sketches from Doug, and Doug works hand in hand with Dave. But Dave also, it was really important, I think, for Dave on this costume to give us his own little sketches. So he would give Shawna these little sketches of kind of what he was thinking and where his inspo lied with these characters. So we knew pretty much from the beginning what these characters were supposed to look like, but then it was finding the little details and making them special to both Ray and Ivana. And it was really cool. And they're two of my favorite costumes.
Yeah.
Like you said, they're reminiscent of Jedi. So it's I don't know. There's depth to both of these characters, and they were both Ivana and Rey were just so much fun to work with, and they were also both just so excited for their costumes and getting to put them on and wearing them and loving their costumes to the point that, you know, they'd have breaks sometimes and they wouldn't take them off. And it was, they were a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, why would you want to take these costumes off? They are absolutely incredible. So, I mean, don't blame them. This has been great. I love talking about this series. It's incredible, and I think everyone who worked on it should be super proud. It's a masterpiece to me. It's probably one of my favorite Star Wars, not just shows, but like even it's in the realm of the movies too. It's one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars content. So I appreciate the team. But of course you're here, and you know, I knew Shawna quite well just from having her on a podcast. I thought maybe we could talk about Shawna just for a little bit as well too. So, I mean, let's talk about Shawna. How did the two of you meet?
So after I got that phone call that I mentioned in the beginning, I winded up being a day player on Book of Boba Fett. And I remember showing up to their first day of shooting with backgrounds. And it was very well organized. And the thing was, though, is she established all of her costumes, which most designers do that. But she's also very adamant in establishing every single one of the background people. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to be there for that on set day of. And I don't remember quite what happened that day, but for some reason, all of a sudden we needed to add some scarves and some more layers to the characters that had already had fittings, and they didn't have scarves or layers. Like, I don't remember what the note was, but for some reason it came back that they all needed something else on them. And so it was just this kind of like, you know, fight or flight moment. Her main team was busy with, you know, all of the principals, because it was a really big day on set, and they were there too. But I remember one of her keys of just being like, oh my God, here's a bag of scrim, which is what we called our bags of scrap fabric. And they were like, can you please just go like add layers onto these people? And I was like, sure, why not? And it's like, working on something like Star Wars is really intimidating in a sense of like, you don't want to mess this up. And there's rules. And we had rules we established. Like, I think one of the first things that was told to me when I was working before we even started dressing background is there's no closures in space. So if for some reason you see a closure, make sure you cover it up. And, you know, different things. And like, there's no knots. And so if you have to tie something, you can't tie a knot and like stuff like that. So it was like, having to think on your feet of how to like close something or do something when you're putting it on a human being, having to think outside of the box. It was both really exciting, but also really intimidating. And for me, I was just so excited. And I just took that bag of scrim and I started going up to these people and I was dressing them and I was doing things. And then next thing I know, there's this person doing the same thing next to me. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I turn and look and it's Shawna. And I was just like, oh. I was like, do you like what I'm doing? She's like, no, I love what you're doing. Keep doing it. She's like, this is great. Add more of this color. Do this. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And then she came back in 5 minutes and loved what I was doing. And then her set people, who I had worked with a few of them before, all of them knew my love of Star Wars because it was well known in the costume community that I loved Star Wars. And so all of them, Shawna needed a new person to step up into the office to sort of take over one of the roles of an ACD, because she had 2 ACDs, and one of them winded up leaving early on in the series, and they needed someone else to step up. And all of them just kept, Shawna would be like, well, who do you think I should bring over? And all of them just kept saying my name. So like, forever grateful. But then also Shawna really, really liked working with me. And I think I was wearing one of my Star Wars jackets that day. And she just was like, she clearly loves Star Wars too. So they invited me to work over office and kind of history. Shawna and I we we got each other, and she really liked me and really liked my passion. And I really enjoyed working with her. And it doesn't happen too often that you meet someone in your life who you just get. And Shawna and I had that relationship. Like, we didn't even have to communicate, and we both knew each other's needs. And that it was, we had a really special like bond. And it's funny because you can ask anyone on the crew and they'd be like, yeah, E knows how to Shawna speak, because like Shawna sometimes would tell you what it is she would want, or she'd text you something and people would be like, I don't know what she's trying to say. And I'd be like, show it to me. And I'd be like, oh, she wants X, Y, and Z. And they'd be like, how do you know that? How can you interpret that from her? She would respond back with like a K or an okay or a good. And I'd be like, that actually means is, and then I would translate it for them. And they'd be like, oh, okay. I got Shawna, and I am so grateful I got to meet her and work with her. And she also, you know, she took a chance on me, and not very many people do that anymore. There's not too many. You have, and like, this is nothing against it, because obviously if you have a team you work great with, you're going to keep that team on and you're going to keep going. But a lot of people don't like taking chances, because with taking chances, there's no guarantee. So if you have a guarantee, you're going to go with a guarantee. But Shawna was all about taking chances. A lot of our crew in our warehouse, like our tailors and our specialty team, they were non-union, and Shawna knew that they had a special skill that we needed. And she'd be like, why don't you come work for me? Why don't you do this? Like, you're obviously really passionate about it. And a lot of these people, so she got a lot of people in our union, and very talented people who just didn't know where to go or what to do. And she saw their potential, and she was like, come work with me. And she was all about that. And like, even at the end, it's like, I'll never forget one of my last like meetings with Shawna, where I was hanging out with her, is like, she told me that she was like, you're ready to design and you need to be a designer. And she's like, I believe in you and you just need to do it. But it's like, she was always there to be like giving you the belief that you needed in order to do your job. And she was very nurturing and, you know, caring in that way. And I think that's something anyone will tell you, is that Shawna cared. And again, not saying other people don't care, but it was like, we all called her mom. So it was always like, she was a mom. She, you know, and if for some reason you needed to take a few days off for mental health, or if you needed to do something with your family, because her family was so important to her, she'd be like, no, 100% do that. So Shawna was just, I mean, she was a force and absolutely an amazing individual to work with. And I'm so honored that I got to work with her. And I got to, as you know, I keep trying to tell myself, I got to work on a trilogy. I did my own Star Wars trilogy, and I got to do that with Shawna. And I'm so honored that I got to do that. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, from the time that I knew her, what I really gathered was that she was an advocate for people. Every time we talked, she would always say the same three things. She would first always talk about how her children were her motivators and she loved them dearly. She would always talk about her love for the fans and that she always wanted to do right by the fans, no matter what. And she knew that they're always watching every little detail that you all would do. So she was very aware of that. And she would always just talk about how blessed she was to work with such an incredible crew. And she was just such a big advocate for all of you. And she just saw the talent in every single person. And you're right, she would stick up for people and help them to get into places that maybe other designers might not have, given them those same opportunities.
Yeah. And she saw things in people that I don't think most people would take the time to see. She saw who you truly were, and she wanted you to be the best version of yourself. Her door was always open. And that was something that she definitely prided herself in, is that her door was always open. And she was always open to anyone on the crew coming to talk to her about anything. It didn't even have to be about work. because she wanted you to know that she's there for you and supporting you. And, you know, when people were getting sick, she'd make sure, she'd be like, do you need to go see the doctor? Like, make sure you're doing your cayenne shots, or like, you know, she was just always, she cared so much about everyone.
Yeah. I also think Shawna was hilarious too. I mean, she would say things and make me laugh all the time.
Yeah. I mean, she was so funny. I mean, I'm sure you heard about, you know, like her smudging and like all of that, which, you know, to our crew being like, oh, Shawna, but like we just accepted it. That was always something to do. Yeah. And we would accept it. But like, yeah. But some of my favorite stories would be Shawna loved eating. And that's one of the things we also bonded over, because I also love to eat. And I am definitely always like, okay, cool. When's lunchtime? When's snack time? What are we getting for snack? Like that is always, I have to know what I'm eating next, or I have to know when coffee's coming. Like she wasn't allowed to have coffee though, by the way. She was not allowed to have caffeine. Caffeine made her crazy, and she would obsess over things. I would just be like, let it go. You can't obsess on that. Please let it go. So it was also me constantly having to watch to make sure she wouldn't have caffeine. And I would know, because sometimes she would sneak it and I'd come into the room and she'd get this like she'd do this little thing. And I'd be like, you had caffeine, didn't you? And she'd be like, no. And I'd be like, you have caffeine. And stuff like that. But I remember there was this one day our PA came running up to us and she was like, I can't find Shawna. And Shawna's supposed to be doing this thing and I don't know where she is. And I can't find Shawna. And I was like, okay. I was like, is there food in the kitchen? And she was like, no, I haven't gone to the grocery store. Cause our PA went to the grocery store like twice a week and was always really great about it. But usually Monday mornings we would come in and the PA would have to wait till a little later in the day to go in. But Shawna would come in at like 6 a.m. So, you know, by 8 a.m. she's ready for a snack or something. And so this was like at 9 or something in the morning. She's like, I can't find Shawna. And I was like, have you gone to the grocery store yet? She's like, no. And I was like, watch this. And I called her and she answered and I was like, Shawna, where are you? Are you at the grocery store? She was like, yeah. For everyone. So she would just like, she was always so funny and thoughtful, but it was like people would be like, we don't know where Shawna is, and it'd be panic moment. And I'd be like, guys, she hasn't eaten.
She's hungry.
Like, has she had food? And if the answer is no, then she's wherever the food is. I like guarantee you, like, and that could be anywhere. It would be like, if she hasn't eaten, she's at Crafty. Or she's at catering, like go look for her there. So it's just stuff like that.
She's so relatable.
Yeah. And it's just like, duh, of course she's getting food. She's hungry. So stuff like that, where it would just be like, it's just little things. But yeah, she was so funny and just so, so full of life, and I'm so happy and honored that I got to work with her, and I miss her.
Yeah. I mean, I think about her every day. I just can't imagine how you all feel, but I know that she would be so proud of every single one of you, and just seeing you all go on and do such incredible projects. It's just a beginning for literally her entire crew. So I'm excited to see what's next for you all. And one thing I learned about, which I didn't know about until after she was gone, was the pink flamingo that she would incorporate into her costumes. And I was like, when I found out, I was like, how did I not know this when I interviewed her 3 fucking times? You know, like I was like, how did I not know this? Why did she do this? What was the pink flamingo to Shawna?
Honestly, actually, we never talked about how it started for her, really. She just, I think because that was Shawna. It was like on a whim. She just decided to do something. And because that is very Shawna MO, by the way. She'd just be like, no, I'm going to do this. And you'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
And she'd stick with it. And I think that's kind of what happened with the pink flamingo, because she started using it, I think, pretty early on in her career.
So it sounds
as
like
a costume. And she would sneak it in places. And sometimes it would be in very obvious places. Like I know in Firefly, on someone's, it's a jacket, and then like she did oh god, I'm gonna blank on the movie name, but it's on a tie. Like there's an actual flamingo on a tie, and in Mandalorian season 3, it's in a hidden, you don't actually see it because that's sometimes incorporate it, knowing that you couldn't necessarily actually see it, but it would be there. And in the Mandalorian, on one of our Survivor Mandos, he has this like a woven chain that the story like that the actor came up with is that he made it and it carries a picture of his family that he lost. Like that was the actor's story. And Shawna totally went in with it and made him this beautiful like woven thing. And then there was like a sketch, but like an etching. And then one of the etches in it is on the back of it was this like flamingo.
Wow.
And then in Ahsoka, I think we snuck it in on one of the armor pieces. But I think it's on the inside. So,
Okay.
so she always tried to incorporate a flamingo in everything, she worked on, and, they're there. But again, for fans looking for it, being like, oh my God, I have to find the Shawna flamingo. They're not always visible. She was, a true professional and knew that she couldn't just have like a pink flamingo like out on someone's lapel all the time. But she would hide it somewhere and it would be kind of like her, like I was here and And I think she also just had fun with it. It was her way of having fun with the costume.
Yeah.
Getting to leave her mark.
It's like our own little dirty secret, Well, there's been an outpouring of love for Shawna and all of those who have worked with her, you, the crew. And I was at the lovely Comic-Con panel you were a part of at Los Angeles. Then, of course, later, Ahsoka won the CDGA earlier this year. So what do you think it would mean to her seeing all this love, not just for the show she loved, but for the crew and for her career?
So again, like you've mentioned before, Shawna cared immensely. Shawna always, even before she worked on Star Wars, cared about fans because Shawna's done some very iconic sort of nerd fandom shows. Like she worked with Joss Whedon and she did Power Rangers was one of her first shows she ever worked on. So like she's a nerd from the beginning. And so she's always cared about the fans and the fandom and making them proud and always wanting to interact with them. And her love of the fans, I think definitely winded up translating into, or not translating, but like her love of the fans and interacting with the fans also had our crew also loving and interacting with the fans as well. I think, what was it? It was at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim. We had our one main set costumer, Mary, she, who takes care of Mandalorian. She would go up and she would fix different Mandalorians costumes of being like, no, the cape needs to be draped like this. And so it's just like fun little interactions like that. The fans finding out that Mary takes care of Mando. And it's like, Shawna encouraged all that. She wanted us to interact with fans. And also made it much more special for us too. And I mean, it was definitely a driving force behind Ahsoka because we knew how much Rebels and Ahsoka are beloved characters and shows. And so when we were making these costumes, like our own tailors and custom made people, they're huge Star Wars fans. Like Rob, who made young Ahsoka and Ahsoka's costumes, he's such a huge fan of those characters. And so he knew going into making it that he wanted to do it right. And Shawna also encouraged our love for the shows and the fandoms because she knew that that would help drive us to be better artists and better, better just overall kind of advocates for the own show. And like, wanting to do great things for the show was, having love for it. And so Shawna's, her favorite thing, she was at Comic-Con. I'll never forget. She did at Star Wars Celebration in London. She did get permission to show off the some of the fabric patches, but it was always just be like, sometimes I'd be like, Shawna, where did you get permission? Like what's gonna happen? It's like very much and I'm like, but I have, because like Lucasfilm, and it's like always great and wanted to work with us and wanted us to have fun with the fans too. So it always turned out. It's just me being the little worry wart can be and just being like, shut up. But she loved the fans. And I do truly feel like that is, and like my biased opinion, but like I do think that's why, and this Ahsoka especially, I feel like we've gotten such fan feedback of just like, of loving the costumes and loving the show in general, is because so much love went into every single piece and so much. And I think the fans see that and they appreciate it. And therefore they've all just been very, I've never had such a outpouring on my own social media of people just reaching out to me, of just being like, like, hey, love your work. Next time you're at a convention, would love to say hi, and just like, just love about community. And Shawna did too. So
I just thank you so much for being here. This has been such a joy, and I miss her every day, but she would be so proud of all of you. It was an incredible show, and I'm just so excited to see what all of you do next. Costume designer Elissa, Alcala, thank you so much for joining. This has been such a joy.
Thank you.
The Art of Costume podcast is hosted and produced by Elizabeth Joy Glass and Spencer Williams. Our audio engineering and editing is done by Dan White. Follow us on TikTok at The Art of Costume and Instagram at The Art of Costume Pod. If you want to support the show, go to theartofcostume.com/podstore. For more podcast updates, costume reviews, deep dives, and interviews, go to theartofcostume.com, a blog dedicated to highlighting the best in costume design.